Making your own takedown bow, part 3, steam bending the recurve. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about steam bending wood. I use steam bending to make bow limbs and to put a little bit of recurve on them so that the bow performs a bit better. You need a few things in order to steam bend wood. You need a steam box, you need a heat source to make the steam, obviously, and you need a form that you can clamp the timber into so that once it's bent, it stays bent. So I'll go through those with you now quickly. So for my form, what I've done is I've joined a number of pieces of plywood together. You can see there's 3 different pieces, and then I've cut my form out of that. I've got different angles. I've got about a 30-degree angle over here, a 45-degree there, and a 60 over here. I can clamp on at the bottom here, put a piece of hardwood there, and that can be an end stop for a 30-degree bend. I can do something similar from here for my 45, and what I've currently been using is about 60. Now that won't give me exactly 60 because there is a bit of spring back that happens afterwards, but it gets me fairly close to what I want. So the form is hollowed out in the middle here. That's basically so that I can clamp things on. So what do we have here? We have a curve. I've widened that with this piece of plywood over here so that I can have my 2 pieces of timber next to each other, and I can bend them at the same time. I have a piece at the bottom that is like a stopper that I can put the end of the timber up against to ensure that they both are the same length, they bend at the same place. And I have a sheet metal strap. Now that sheet metal strap has a piece on the end here which holds the end of the pieces of timber, and what we're trying to achieve with that is some compression along the length of the timber. So these are all quite important factors. If you do this without the strap, you're probably going to get splitting out or cracking on the outside of the bend, particularly if, as I do, you're using store-bought timber, which is generally kiln dried. Most people, when they're steam bending wood, are going to use air dried timber. That's sometimes difficult to get. Sometimes the quality is not that great unless you go and cut a tree down yourself. So I just use kiln dried. When I do that, I need to steam it for a bit longer. Because it's kiln dried, it's been dried out to a greater degree, and so it needs a bit more steam to get it supple again. So then I need something to contain the steam, and what I've done is I've just built this out of plywood. It's just a box out of plywood. I've closed in the bottom end. I've got a little piece of copper pipe which joins onto my steam reservoir, and essentially that's it. It's just a little bit of pine there with some plywood on the outside, and I happen to have a little bit of high heat silicon lying around in my shed, so I used that in the corners just to make sure I've got a good seal. I've got a couple of little screws there, you can see. They're just string a piece of wire from one to the other, and that allows me to hang my piece of timber in there. That sits like that vertically, and I have a hole here where I put a candy thermometer in through there, which I swiped from my wife's kitchen. That allows me to know when the temperature inside here gets to 100 degrees, and I can then start timing how long I'm steaming my timber for. It's also got a little lid which helps keep the steam in. So I would normally just leave that a little bit open like so. For my heat source, I've got an old gas barbecue, and that I find works quite well for me. I've made this little ring out of sheet metal which I've just riveted together. I've cut some slots. Those slots marry up with these so that I can ensure that when the flame comes out and I'm getting that heat, that the heat that comes out of this is going straight up. It's not going out to the side. And then I put my water in here. Obviously there's no fuel in here. That would be a bit silly. And as you can see, this fits inside that ring and keeps all the heat, concentrates the heat on the bottom of the can. The can, I've taken a little piece of dowel timber. I've just cut a piece off, sanded it back so it fits nicely into the mouth. And I've just drilled a hole the right size for that copper pipe in the steam box to fit into. So the steam box and the copper pipe is then just going to slot in there like that. And now I have a fairly nicely sealed system where I can generate steam inside here. It's going to go up into my steam box and steam the wood. And the ladder behind this is just a backyard show, things you can do in your backyard. This is obviously not very stable, so I just tie it onto the ladder and away I go. Okay, so we're getting a bit of steam coming out of the top of our steam box, and our little temperature gauge is showing just about 100 degrees Celsius, a bit over 200 degrees Fahrenheit. So we should now put our wood inside the steam box. Okay, so we've been steaming this wood for an hour now, and I'm about to take it out and bend it. But what I've done is, before I've got to this point, I've made sure that everything is ready, because when that comes out of the steamer, it's going to cool down quite quickly, and we need it to remain hot while we bend it. So everything's pre-organized, ready to go. So I've got my form, I've got my strap ready to go. I know that this is going to be tight enough. I've got a little spacer which I can pop in just to make sure it is tight. And because the end of the piece of wood that I'm going to bend is smaller than this gap, I've got a couple of little pieces of wood which I might use just to ensure that it sits nicely up against the sheet metal strap. Because if one end of it gets caught on this side against the form and the other end is allowed to go up against the strap, I'm going to get a twist in that piece of wood. So it's important that everything just lines up perfectly and is straight. Okay, so let's get to it. Now obviously I'm going to be wearing some gloves because the wood that we're going to pull out of here is going to be 100 degrees Celsius, or about 200 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's going to be quite hot. Right, got it down, we're getting our wood out. Pop that in there. We don't hear any cracks. Nice and slowly, but not too slowly, remembering we've got limited time. And let's get that clamped on. Now you'll notice that I'm not clamping it at each individual point, because I'm giving the wood a little bit of flexibility or allowance to bend in the way that it wants to. I don't need it to be perfectly on that form. I just need it to be about that amount of bend. So here's some timber that I've bent using the steam bending process. Because I want both pieces of timber to be bent in the same way, what I do is I do them together. So I cut both pieces from the same original piece of timber. I steam them together so they have the same amount of heat, the same amount of steam, and I put them into the form together side by side and clamp them into the form together so that they have the same amount of rest time before I take them out. And that's the way that I'm able to get a reasonably close same bend between the two pieces of timber.